All right. Okay, can you guys hear me? I guess you guys can hear me. All right, sounds good. All right, it's really hot outside. Seems like here is slightly better, but I know that you guys are suffering, so I'll make it quick. I'll just present really quickly, and then I'll leave some minutes for questions if you guys have any. So first, thank you so much for coming. So I'm co-founder and CEO at StableNode, and I'm also one of the recognized delegate for MakerDAO. I see some of the MakerDAO friends here, so thank you for coming as well as StableNode members. So to start off, we're going to talk about governance theory and practice. I know it sounds kind of boring, but it is also quite interesting, right? Because a lot of times, especially in crypto or especially in DeFi, we like to talk about how this kind of being DAO can solve a lot of problems, right? So we also have a lot of different protocols or sometimes different companies, and then they will ask questions like, okay, like we have this problem with, let's say, token price. We want to be more decentralized. We want to solve this and this and that. Maybe even world hunger and others. And they just think that becoming a DAO will just magically solve it, right? Well, but the problem is that if you really dig this deeper and then kind of ask about, okay, so we want to become a DAO, but how can we become a DAO? I think that a lot of protocols as well as different companies and entities have a very hard time understanding how actually become a DAO. And even if they understand what DAO is, like how do we actually get there? Like, so what are some of the case studies or some of the examples? So a lot of times, a lot of protocols will just put the literally name DAO behind it, thinking that it somehow makes it decentralized. Or they were kind of right about how much they like decentralization, but in reality, it is not, right? So we have seen that there are many different kind of DAOs growing. And then for today's talk, it's not about talking about each different DAO and talking about how they're different, right? But just that we realized that especially as protocols become more decentralized, as well as the industry is growing, we saw that there was a lot of different diverse, whether it's in NFT, whether it's a DeFi, whether it's more social cause. And then, so there are more and more DAOs, but at the same time, I think that there hasn't been a lot of research regarding like how to actually make a good DAO, and then not enough discussion. Like there are a lot of research and a lot of like opinions about it that is true, but at least the market as well as the industry itself is very, very young, as well as the discussion. So that's something that we want to discuss in this talk as well. So the problem is that once again, the number of DAOs has been growing as well as their diversity. However, there are many challenges, right? So there have been, for example, some of the governance attacks, and this is even like happening at some of the more mature DAOs as well. And then even for, I would say, not just governance attacks, but it can also involve like a lack of oversight, or it can be lack of accountability, or it can be just lack of experience, right? Because for a lot of protocols, they might be very competent in terms of technical aspect, but in terms of governance and others, it is also a different matter. So, besides this, we also saw some of the more tricky questions. For example, the question about if, let's say, token holders, as a majority decide to do something, should a team really, kind of agree to it? Like, is it something that's bound by promise and then something that's like smart contract? Or is it something that, for example, team, if they decide that it might be hostile and not good for the protocol, can they reject it, right? And then if the DAO wants, can they, basically, for example, in the case of the, with Merit Circle, like, okay, I understand the team made a legal contract, but can DAO basically be like, okay, we don't want your money, you can get it back with some profit. Like, it is something that's allowable. And then I think there's a lot of those questions don't really have a clear answer, right? And then that's also the reason why we're having this kind of talk to discuss more about like, okay, what are the boundaries and what are the discussions? So, that's where I think StableNode comes in, is that for StableNodes, we have been focusing a lot on governance. So we've been, as an individual or as a team, we've been helping with many different protocols. So, for me personally, I've been engaged with Maker for quite a long time. And then there are some other protocols like InstadApp, as well as Optimism, as well as Emmet Finance and Balance and others that we're helping. And then, so once again, governance itself is very new. So we like to say that there's no really a right answer. There are just many wrong answers if you go too extreme, right? So that's how we like to say it, is we don't make you perfect, and nobody's perfect. And it's not just like talking between like girlfriend and boyfriend kind of thing. It's like, we try to minimize errors, but there's no such thing as perfect for everybody, right? However, what we can do, or what we're thinking, is that we want to focus on both theory and practice. Now, I know that we also talk about theory versus practice, and there has been some discussion regarding like, both, not just in like crypto, right? Like we see in like a real world, the question about, okay, theory and practice. You probably remember back in college, you looked at your professor and be like, okay, he knows all about theory, but he has no real experience, right? I think that that same thing can apply in this governance as well. So for stable node, we have many different theories that we have about different governance that we develop over our experience, whether that's for Maker or talking with others, or whether that's discussing with many different protocols. Now we use that to put into practice. So whether that's working as a delegate, helping as a delegate, or helping them improve their DAOs and others. And then we see the feedback, right? So for example, let's say that we have this theory and then we go there and realize that it's really bad. Then we go back and say, okay, it was really, really bad, didn't work. So we get the feedback, right? So you can see that we have this kind of feedback and cycle. And then, yes, there's no really perfect answer or solution or silver bullet, but we can try to minimize errors and also learn from our mistakes, as well as learn from success cases. So what we've been doing is, give me a second. It is very slow. Hopefully it's not built on Ethereum. What is this? Okay, now it works. So, what we kind of also realize is that, for also big protocols, there's also a lot of different discussions, right? And also reasonings. And then whether it's, so from the outsider perspective, it might be a simple decision, but at least within governance, it's something that requires a lot of discussion as well as a lot of coordination. And then that's the same thing for Maker as well. There are some people who say Maker is a boomer DeFi. I can understand why you say it. But at the same time, Maker also has a lot of cutting-edge technology and also a lot of discussions and then also collaborations happening. And that also involves not just technical aspect, but also a lot of governance as well. So, okay. So in terms of the how to look at the this kind of best practice side, what we want to do is that we want to examine and then abstract and experiment. So we want to look at some of the successful DAOs, right? Yes, successful is subjective. I'm not going to go into philosophy talk, since especially we're in France, I'm not good at that. But what we can do is, at least from those success cases, we can try to gather some like, okay, what were some of the common elements, right? Like, how did they become successful, or why did they fail? Things like that. And then we can use those and try to experiment. So, once again, that kind of feedback, right? So we have this theory, and they put into practice. And then we come back, and they say, they didn't like it. We say, okay, that's too bad. It's like ice cream. We tried a different flavor. Let's see what works. Now, so what we kind of realized is that we came down to this at least 6 major. And then, it can change as well. But the idea is basically, we talk about voting side, right? So whether it's on-chain or off-chain, and then as well as communication. So this can involve the communication within governance, as well as like communicating there about like there's a new voting coming up and the things like that. Treasury management, treasury is very important, because we also saw that without like this kind of oversight, there might be some cases where it's getting hacked, or they might run away and try to buy a new yacht. Although it might be nice to be there, token holders probably not happy, right? Or like talking about if you want to be a DAO, like how can you have these core units or others that work with them, right? So many different questions regarding it. And then the next one is like, for example, like if you have a proposal, well, you can write proposal in many different ways, but you want to also make it standard, so it's easier for the community to trying to assess it as well as compare it and pass it. And then another important part that a lot of DAOs forget is that you want to also document it as much as possible. So whether it's your process, whether it's the result, whether it's this kind of different interactions, you want to document them so a third party or others who join the DAO later can also review it and then view as well. Now, okay, so I think the MakerDAO is also a very interesting case, right? Because in a way, it became DAO. So it started as a DAO, and then if Rune is here, he can tell you more about it. But basically, he can tell you that it started as a DAO, but they realized that they have a hard time paying people because it's a DAO and they don't know how to. So they start with the foundation to give this more stability as well as other ways to expand. And then now, Maker Foundation dissolved and became a DAO. And then now it's managed by different core units as well as different facilitators. And then now we also have delegates. And initially, delegates were not paid job. So it was more about honor just itself, but then realized that it's not sustainable because itself requires a lot of time and commitment as well as a lot of research. So now there's also delegate compensation. But this is also a good case where this kind of decentralization and DAO formation didn't just happen overnight, right? Like it took many years, many discussions, many tiers, and many beers probably, to try to convince, as well as discussion. So once again, DAO formation, we like to hear that people say it's easy. They just put DAO in it, but once again, it's not that easy. But it can be done, and it has to be a discussion. And then talking more about MakerDAO is that actually before this Wintermute member talk about this as well. It's like there's a lot of also interesting ideas going on, right? So for example, Rune, who's a former CEO at Maker Foundation, he had this idea for endgame plan, and he has many different ideas. And then we also have Hasu, who also has a different idea for it. So once again, the interesting about DAO and also this kind of decentralized organization is that everybody can present their opinions. Sometimes some people might disagree, but they can also discuss and then think about ways to benefit the protocol. And then, yeah, I think that is it. And then, I know this is a meme, but at the same time, I think it's also true, right? Because even for MakerDAO, who has been DAO for, I would say, compared to other DAOs, much more mature and also went through ups and downs, is that there's not really a true DAO per se, right? Like it's a work in progress, right? And there's a lot of discussion and also a lot of mistakes and success to it. So, if you're curious more, you can also contact here. But I don't know whether we have time left, but if you have time left, you can ask me questions. Okay, so if anybody has any questions or complaints, you can let me know. I'm happy to hear. All right, any questions? Okay. Seems like everybody wants to get out and get more creme brulee or something, so I guess no questions? Oh, okay, so we have a question.
Yeah. So do mainly how, like basically on all these protocols that you guys are in, like how do you define what a good delegate is, and how do you see all these differences from one to the next? What do you say that the delegates actually need to do for the protocol, and what are the requirements that you see for anyone to be successful there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the question about what sets, let's say, good delegate versus bad delegate. And I think it's also a tricky question, right? Because I'm a delegate myself, so I consider myself good, but maybe I'm a villain, who knows? But I do think that there's at least like common elements, right? Like we want somebody that can also engage with the protocol. So, we have, like, for example, delegates, not just Maker, but if you look at other protocols, they might have somebody that maybe have a good idea once, but then you also have to have this process where you get the feedback from the community and then, back and forth. So we believe that, like, some people might disagree, but for us, it's like it doesn't matter if you have a lot of tokens delegated or not. It's more about how do you engage with the community. And then I think that it's important as a delegate that it's not like some kind of badge that you can wave, but rather that you're part of the community and have to hear their feedback and then also kind of respond to it. So that's kind of my idea of the ideal delegate, where even if delegate, let's say, is not professional in their own field, let's say, like somebody is not technical enough to understand it, if they're willing to learn and also they're willing to listen, I think that's more important than somebody that assumes that he knows everything. So that's and then I think somebody else had a question.
Could you share an example or two of DAOs that are leading on the frontier of governance and you think that other DAOs should be learning from? Maybe like some practical examples of what they're doing that other DAOs aren't?
Yep, so that's a good question. It was a very controversial question because so don't say that I didn't choose something and then later blame me, right? But I must say, like, especially MakerDAO has a lot of examples that other DAOs can learn from. Now, it's not for everybody. Sometimes I think it's similar to food choice, whether, sometimes it's more personal preference. But I'll say that the reason why Maker has a lot to learn is because also it went through a lot of ups and downs, right? Both bear markets and bull markets, both a lot of dramas that you don't need to subscribe to Netflix anymore, right? So if you think about it, like those kind of questions and then political struggle or others has made it very strong. And also the fact that a lot of, like, for example, if you go to Maker Forum, like, you can go there and then you realize that there's a lot of discussion. So but not just people talking about different news, but people have different ideas how to improve the protocol. But I would say that a lot of DAOs, if you go there, there's not much discussion, right? Well, sometimes they have a post about, can I get a refund? Yes, sure. But you can imagine the healthy DAOs have this kind of healthy discussion, and that's why I think Maker is a good example. In terms of other DAOs that might be also interesting would be, for example, Aave. I think it's pretty interesting. And then their governance is different, but at the same time, it has been very healthy. And if you go to, for example, their forum, there are many different ideas floating around. And then, yes, there has been also requests for many other, for example, transparency and like accountability, but I think that applies to all different DAOs. So, and that itself is good because, for example, if you go to Aave, you also have those posts talking about some of the clarifying questions, right? And that is good because you want the DAO to ask those questions. If you have a DAO that just accept that, like, okay, because it's been run this way, it's fine, that it's not fine. Think about it. If you're in, like, let's say, political system, do you just want to trust the politicians to do everything for you? Well, maybe you do, that's fine. But you also want to ask about, like, where's the money going? Like, what's the purpose of this? And things like that. So I would say that that's kind of defined as, all right, I think we don't have time anymore, right? All right, well, thank you so much for this. Okay, so, okay, maybe one last. Okay, yeah. Okay, so good question. Should I be paid or should I get fired myself? That's a very good question. But I would say that actually that depends. Because the reason is that ideally in the long term, it is true that delegates should get compensated in some way. Like even if it's not like salary per se, like at least have a similar interest, like whether it's vesting or others. But the reason why I say it depends is that for some of the protocols, they might be too new to really have this concept or this kind of idea. But once you have a DAO and like serious DAO that really focus on decentralized ideal, I think it's very important to at least have this system because you also want to be, have them commit both time and resource, and also make sure that they're compensated for their time, right? So that's my thinking. Thank you.